You know, you wonder why nothing gets done in the federal government. Since the Liberals came in 2015, they've expanded the size of the federal bureaucracy by 40%. And they've increased the amount of the federal payroll to nearly $70 billion a year. That's 60% higher than it was when they came to office. And yet, I would argue that federal services have deteriorated. You can't get a passport. You can't get an airport to operate. They have the ArriveCan app that costs $60 million. It should have cost $200,000. I mean, you have all sorts of examples of the incompetence of this government. And yet, we're spending so much more on a bureaucracy. Well, I think Yves Giroux, who is the parliamentary budget officer, has come up with the answer. He says the average federal department and agency has 7 layers of management. 7 layers of management. I mean, the Bible says, no man may serve 2 masters. How can you serve 7? And that's why nothing gets done. There are so many managers managing managers, and none of them willing to take accountability, that everything just gets sucked up into this giant vortex of indecision. Imagine that. Okay, you have to make a decision, so you pass it up to your manager, and that manager passes it up to their manager, who passes it up higher and higher, and then comes back down to get more information, then it goes back up again. And then there's a series of meetings being held to talk about what needs to get done, and then no one can decide, so they hire outside consultant. I mean, the whole process is nothing but process. There are no decisions being made. No wonder nothing gets done. The amazing thing, though, is Giroux also found out that under half of federal agencies and departments, about 44% of them, meet their annual performance targets. And the amazing thing about that is they set their own targets. They set their own targets, and only about 44% of departments can make their targets. And yet, on top of that, 89% of federal executives, and we're learning from Giroux that there are 7 layers of executives, 89% of executives in the federal government get bonuses averaging $17,000 a year, on top of the fact they're already better paid than their private sector counterparts. I mean, it used to be the case that people in the public sector made a little bit less money, but they got better pension benefits and less chance of being laid off. Now, they work fewer hours, they take longer vacations, they get higher pay, they get better pensions, and they almost never get laid off. During the pandemic, almost no federal managers were laid off. And yet nothing gets done. And I think Yves Giroux has pointed us in the right direction. It's 7 layers of management. He was asked by the Government Operations Committee of the House of Commons the other day what his biggest concern was with this exploding payroll and the exploding bureaucracy. He said, there's this disconnect between the number of people who are working for the federal government and the level of service. And that was his biggest concern. It should be pretty obvious that the big reason nothing gets done in the federal government is it is so top-heavy. For Postmedia, I'm Lorne Gunter.